Hello, hi everyone, and welcome back to the summer series. And this is the grand finale of the summer series, brought to you by Inspiring Workplaces in partnership with H&H. 7 weeks we've had of daily live learning, sharing, and inspiration. And as I said, today it all comes to a close. It's our grand finale though, so we're not going out without a bang today. We've heard some incredible case studies from all over the world so far this summer, from Suzuki GB and Santander to Philips, Bank of America and Vodafone New Zealand. We've heard about subjects such as diversity, neuroscience, hybrid work, employee experience, well-being, behavioral psychology, digital engagement, and the list goes on. We've heard from countries such as the Netherlands, Canada, North America, Spain, and many, many more. This sounds a bit corny, but it's been a real summer of love. I've had a real love of learning. I've really loved hearing everyone sharing their stories. And I've loved that sense of community, building these inspiring workplaces together. So why are we here today? And why have we decided to choose for the grand finale and the close of our summer series on the subject of creating inclusive cultures? Well, we, the team at Inspiring Workplaces and our community of inspirers all over the world, we spend a lot of time talking and collaborating with our community. Firstly, some of you may have attended one of our collaborative workshops that I ran 4 months ago, where we based it on the outcomes from some of the Roundel 2021 research on employee experience trends. Our second workshop that we ran, which was titled How to Create Inclusive Cultures, saw the biggest number of sign-ups and attendees, and it completely surpassed any of the expectations we had. That in itself showed to us how important inclusion is and how much of it is a priority for our community. If any of you attended the Global Inspire-a-thon that we ran in January, where we had 24, in fact, I think it was 26 hours of non-stop speakers speaking on subjects such as engagement, internal communication, psychological safety, leadership, change, etc. The crucial element that really stood out to me during those 24 hours is that we cannot achieve any of our people goals in our organization unless we have a truly inclusive culture. I mentioned that Roundel 2021 research report that we did with This Is Home. This was all about the employee experience trends of 2021, and 40% of respondents said that diversity and inclusion was their top priority for this year, above anything else they had on the agenda. And as quoted in that report, whilst the focus in the news and in the media has been all about race, or a lot about race over the last year, corporate diversity and inclusion agendas tend to be broader, targeting everything from ability, LGBTQ+, inclusion, as well as race and gender equality. Yet doing the minimum is not enough. Our employees are now holding our organizations to account. Yet, despite this great work, we are not as far forward on inclusion as we think we'd be, or as we would like to be. And I'm sure events, either in the media or that we have seen unfold across our globe, have shown this to us. As a dear friend of ours, Camille Yafai from Diversity Marketplace said, "We're 65 years since the Race Relations Act, yet we're still talking about race discrimination. We seem to be doing so much talking without the action. Today, it's about action. It's about us working together, supporting each other to help each other make truly inclusive cultures in our workplaces." I am absolutely delighted and thrilled to introduce our panelists, who are going to be here sharing and debating their views, their experiences, and their opinions on this exact subject. So joining us from Washington, D.C. in the United States is Misty Johnson Orotohai. I hope I got that right. From Event DC.
Really, that was perfect.
From London, UK, we have Alia Lilali of News UK. From
Hello.
Toronto in Canada, we have Priya Bates of A Leader Like Me. And from Johannesburg in South Africa, we have Dr. Jerry Goulet, who is the CEO of the Institute of People Management. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's so great. So great. We're spanning so many time zones. It's morning and evening for some of you, I'm sure. But welcome to the panel. Some of you have been previous speakers at the summer series and the Inspire-a-thon that I mentioned. It's really nice to see some familiar faces back on stage. So let's start. I'd really like you to introduce yourselves. You've got a maximum of 60 seconds because I always like to put some time pressure on this. Tell us a little bit about, in 60 seconds, maybe who you are, maybe what your mission is or what you're doing right now. But what is your definition of an inclusive culture? Misty, from where I'm looking, you're right next to me. So I'm going to start with you straight away. So we're going to go straight over to DC to Misty.
All right, so good morning or good afternoon or good evening, regardless of where you are. My name is Misty Johnson-Arantujai. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for Events DC. And for me, inclusion really is about recognition and acceptance that everybody is different. Everybody is unique, not the same cloth, not the same pattern. And as organizations, it's our obligation to make sure there's enough space at the table so that everybody gets a seat and has a voice.
The one rule of hosting a panel is take yourself off mute. I said, but nobody heard me. I said, thank you so much for that, Misty. And then I handed the baton over to Alia, but she didn't hear me. So.
I can hear you now, so we're good.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Ruth. It's really great to be here today. I am Alia Lalani. I work at News UK, which some of you will know as The Times, The Sunday Times, The Sun, Virgin Radio, TalkSport, Talk Radio, many media a big media organization with many brands under there. I sit in our diversity team, and I focus on our diversity in leadership pillar, which drives diversity into our wider leadership and focuses on inclusivity. And for me, I think inclusion or inclusivity is just where it's an environment where everyone can be their true self, where they feel like they belong, where they don't have to be anyone different. And each of those individuals have that opportunity to thrive and develop. And actually those voices then become valued in the organization.
Thank you, Alia. Dr. Jerry.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, my name is Dr. Jerry Gule. I am the CEO of the Institute of People Management in South Africa, which is an organization that helps HR professionals and people managers to do the best that they can for their employees. For me, inclusivity, particularly growing up in this part of the world, is where everyone feels accepted in society and in the workplace, and in that they can make their voices heard and they can be listened to, where feedback is what drives behavior. Thank you. Thank
you, Dr. Jerry. And Priya?
Hello, I'm Priya Bates from Toronto, Canada. I have two businesses, Inner Strength Communication, which is my consulting practice, and A Leader Like Me, which I co-founded with a woman named Advita Patel this last year. And both of them, I talk about my purpose, and that's to build strength from the inside out. And we do that through Inner Strength organizationally and through A Leader Like Me personally to drive that strength. And when I think about diversity and inclusion, we started talking about diversity, inclusion, and equity, but the conversation is changing to belonging, dignity, and justice. And that's what it means to me. It's what everybody on the panel said, that it's about truly belonging, feeling like you can bring what you have that's different, that is an asset to organizations. And it's really that change, that inclusion is a positive, it is a strength. And that's what it means for me.
I think it's great, Priya, how you've just ended the introductions there by talking about how the definition of inclusion is changing, right? Like how people view it and how people are talking about it and how organizations, it's changing. And that, I guess, leads me into my next point. And I alluded to this at the beginning, that we're probably not as far forward as we want to be when we see things like gender gaps increasing, even though we thought we were working on them. When we see awful racism in the UK after a huge football tournament this week, when we see things like the George Floyd things that happened in the US, when we see what's happening globally, we're not as far forward as we think we are, yet the conversation is changing and the conversation is happening. This is for all of you now, what do you think has changed for the positive over the last weeks, months, years in the area of, let's not go back too far, right? But like in the area of inclusion and inclusivity inside organizations?
I could probably start with that. I think what we keep talking about things changing, but what we want to acknowledge is that the conversations from those groups, underrepresented groups, has always been the same, and they've been having those conversations for a long time. I think what's changed is how we're listening to the issues and how we reflect on them personally for a change. Right? Because what's happened, whether it's me or anyone else, we're starting to say, what's our role in keeping the systems that are there, and what is our benefits and our privileges? And I think that shift has made it more personal and is going to help, I think, drive more change than just talking about it as these wide entities that were kind of not personal.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I would say years ago, we were talking about protected characteristics of people or minority groups and things like that. Whereas now we're talking about what role does every single individual have in helping every single individual to feel included, which is great.
And I would agree. I mean, I think that the conversations are happening. They've been the same. There are different people who are listening. We have different generations who are more accepting and have very diverse, complements of friends. And I think that's part of what you kind of have seen. Definitely in the US, when you looked at a number of demonstrations, you saw people from every walk of life. And it didn't just become a single point of interest. But I also think that what we're seeing for the first time is maybe everybody doesn't have to be exactly like me. And I know you understand that in the workplace and even in talent acquisition, you want somebody who looks like you, who thinks like you, who feels like you, who behaves like you. And I think we're progressively seeing a move away from that and an understanding that it creates stagnation, right? If I want to continue to grow and to evolve and have a creative organization, then I should have people with different life experiences, people with different opinions, and a place where it's safe for me to kind of be unique and maybe not just like everybody else. So as those conversations keep happening, the real hope is that whether it's the workplace or other organizations, that we can be open-minded enough and give people the protection that they need, because there's some safety, some infrastructure that's required here in order for all of this to continue to evolve.
I can add to that, Ruth. I mean, in our part of the world, a lot has changed. When exclusion was, for instance, legislated, inclusion is also now legislated in South Africa. That you need to include, your workforce needs to show the demographic or be representatives of the demographics of the country. That's a big change. And secondly, I think young people are also saying, you can't leave us out. We must be part of this organization because we have a different worldview. We want to see a different representation in the workplace and even treatment in society. So as some of my fellow panelists have said, there has been a lot of change. But I think there's one thing that hasn't changed. I know maybe I'm bringing this too early. I'm not sure that we've changed anything in our private spaces. That's what concerns me. Because when I see younger people who did not suffer as the older ones have, where segregation was the order of the day. When you are in a democracy and you still see those tendencies when there's discord in society, that worries me. Because I'm not sure what's taking place in the private spaces. A lot has changed, but some things remain, and that's a concern.
And that's a really interesting point. We're talking a lot about what organizations and governments and society and media can do, but when it comes down to this individual, what are you doing in your private space if someone was watching you, is a really provocative and challenging question for us all to really think about. Thank you, Jerry. Alia, I know that you are in the space of media, and also in an organization that has had some real positive change. What's gone well for you, and why do you think it's gone well?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. And some great points from you all there earlier as well. You know, there's still so much we need to do in this area, but when you look back and kind of think of especially what news has achieved in the last year, it's kind of amazing. You know, it's no secret that the media organization is not diverse, and it still has a way to go. But I think at least for news, with, you know, various brands which are so different from each other and kind of have their own subcultures, this really has been put at the forefront of our business agenda, and that's made a huge difference. We have 7 diverse employee networks, or ERGs, loads of different names depending on where you are in the world, which have come forward because of something that the employees wanted to do or wanted to achieve. And we really started to create a culture of listening to them. And I think it was something that was mentioned earlier, you know, feedback is so important. Using the employee surveys that we send out every year, putting questions on inclusion, on engagement, using the demographic data to really understand what our makeup is, but then also guiding each of those networks through a framework on how they can raise situations to us, and then what we can do to change that. So we have a parenting network. I can never say parents network. News for Parents, which, you know, and as we know from COVID, working women were one of the most highly affected demographics in that. And, you know, with homeschooling and everything, it just became impossible for some of those parents to actually juggle the homeschooling and work-life balance. And so we introduced an extra 5 hours for those parents to take that time and, you know, use it for their homeschooling. So, and we were the first organization in media to actually do that, which was huge. We use our network representatives as a kind of alternative group. And I always say that I need a new name for this group of people, but my network of networks, to just, you know, analyze what's going on in the business, get feedback from them, look at language, look at content, how can we make it better? And we actually, you know, measure all this so we can show that it's working and it's not. Actually, you know, one of the biggest things was, you mentioned it earlier there, Ruth, but I mean, obviously it was horrible, the racial abuse that came off the back of the Euro finals. It's won't even go into the details of it, but I don't know if any of you saw the front page of The Sun yesterday, but it's an amazing example because it hasn't been best, you know, a lot of people don't have the best relationship with The Sun here historically, but actually it's an incredible example of the progress that we've made as an industry, and particularly tabloid. But at the front page yesterday was a picture of Sterling, Rashford and Saka, and it said, "We've got your back, nation unites against racists." And that has really come down to, you know, Victoria Newton's leadership. We've amplified this on our social media. We've put it all up in the buildings, and it really helps drive that feeling of inclusivity in a much more credible way. And actually following, you know, this weekend, and we did this last year as well after the murder of George Floyd, but we started introducing spot therapy specifically for employees from ethnic minority backgrounds, and specifically this week for our Black employees. And I cannot tell you the amount of emails that I've had, not just in response to, thank you so much for actually, you know, I want to take up this offer, but I can't even express how much it means that the company has taken this initiative and is going to do this and thinking about what we need. So yeah, some really great accomplishments there, and great to support.
Yeah, it's really great to hear that we're having conversations and now taking action that maybe 2, 5, even 2 years ago we wouldn't have even considered. Maybe we would have just gone, well, we don't really know where to start, so let's just leave it. Right?
That's so true. And you know, I've been there for 4 years, and actually even just in those 4 years it's changed massively. And my director has been there for 10 years, and she always says it's a completely different place from 10 years ago. But I think that, like, you know, you're talking about action there, and you're totally right, and I think and I don't know if the three of you agree with me here, but feel free to disagree, but every employee, I think, needs to understand that this is not, you know, it is that onus is also on them. It doesn't matter your demographic, it doesn't matter your protected characteristic, or if it's going beyond that protected characteristic. Actually, it is something that all of us have to do. It's not just for our team, or not just for HR. But yeah, I think that's super important.
I've always used my voice, being a mother of 3 very young children, having to homeschool during a pandemic while having baby twins at the same time while trying to work. I've always used my own personal situations to try to use that as a voice and a platform and to relate to others and to drive change in the areas that are relevant to me. But what I've really learned over the last year is it's not about me, and it's not about how many children someone has or whether they have to homeschool in a pandemic. It's about really getting to know, and that old saying of feeling what it's like to be in the shoes of someone else and help them to feel included. What advice do you all have for an individual, a leader, or even an organizational level? This is a pretty broad question, but for someone that maybe doesn't really know where to start, you know, they've got that fear, the fear of doing something wrong, the fear of saying something wrong, the fear of doing tick box or tokenism, the fear. Where should they start in creating and leading an inclusive culture?
You know.
Okay, sorry, Priya.
No, you go ahead, Misty. I'll follow.
Okay, sometimes I think, you know, that super sensitivity, right? One of the first things to do is to, again, you know, create the space that's safe, but let the conversations truly be honest. I think sometimes we are so steeped in that politeness that we're talking around issues and we're stepping on all the eggshells. And that's what makes things blow up and get worse, because while you're trying to be so careful, you're saying all the wrong things. And sometimes it's a simple roundtable. It's pulling people together and saying, you know, we really do need to talk and have opportunities. I just want to hear from you. And I don't think it's about the leader doing all the talking. I think the leader sits back and says, I really want to hear from you, and I need to know what your needs are and what we're not doing and what we can do better. But you can't just listen to them. You've got to figure out how to convert that to action. But that's one of the simplest things you can do that doesn't even cost money. So the smallest company in the world can do that, and make people feel as if you're invested and listening and give them some empowerment.
I think that, you know, as an internal communication professional, we have to start with our values and who are we? Like answering that. So many people, you know, those values are words on a wall or on a poster for a lot of organizations. But when they really matter, we haven't defined what they mean to us and how they actually translate into behaviors, what is expected, you know, in terms of who we are and what we represent. And that's been the great work of the organizations I've helped consult on communications planning, have started with that. Who are we? Where are we going? Why is this important? And it's listening to their employees, but then defining what that looks like from an employee life cycle perspective. Right? So let's make it real. Let's start with those conversations, but then let's connect it to what does that mean when we recruit? What does that mean when we onboard? What does that mean when we manage performance or talent? What does that mean when we're managing exits? You know, what does that mean when we're managing recognition? And it's when that conversation that starts wide actually becomes actionable is when we start holding ourselves accountable to progress.
Yeah,
that's a perfect example of moving from the talking to the talking and listening to the truly listening to the action. And I think some of us are still at that talking stage or that awareness stage or finding our voices, waiting to be heard, maybe even being heard. But it's moving into that action, isn't it? Taking those tangible actions to look at employee life cycles, journeys, call them what you will, but to look at that entire experience for someone and make it truly inclusive at every stage, in every area.
Yeah. I agree with my colleagues. And I would just want to add that, I mean, a good place to start is your own conscience as a person, as a leader. What is it telling you? Because sometimes you can feel, there is something called the feeling. You can feel the culture, the things that are happening in the organization, and just sense that something is not right here. And as a leader, you step up and you ask the question. You can ask your immediate, your immediate person. And if you have a culture of honesty, in other words, allow people to be who they are, they will tell you. I'm a sucker for feedback. I like feedback. When I led an HR department, one of the things that I did was to ask the entire department to give me feedback as their leader. And it was amazing, because when you ask for feedback, you get the good, the bad, and the real ugly. The question is, there will be some truth in that. What do you do with it? That's key. So I would say that a good place to start, what is your heart telling you? What's your head telling you? What's your community telling you? And then say, what are you going to do? I think management teams are sometimes weak. Yeah? We think they're strong, but they are weak, because I've heard of organizations where they get the feedback and they say, this is too horrible. We're not going to give people feedback on this. Right. But get the feedback, report back to the entire organization, and this is the mirror that you have given us, and involve the organization in terms of what are we going to do? Not just the leaders, but everybody. Yeah. Changing a culture and making a place and inclusive, exciting for us to come to work requires everybody. I use the term to be a good buddy. So what kind of a work colleague are you? That's the question, because it's all of us. In fact, what kind of a member of society are you? That builds inclusivity, because as Misty has defined, these are our values. How do we live them out?
Thank you, Jerry. Alia, it must be difficult for an organization, a media organization that was really lacking in any diversity and probably self-proclaimed as not very inclusive, to know where to start. So where did you start, and was there a reason why?
Data. Data always helps. Do you know what? It was quite a few years ago now. And by the way, I totally echo what the three of them say. It's all about creating that safe space. It's leaning into that vulnerability and asking questions. And I think also with the feedback element, sometimes people are scared to give feedback. So it's about finding the ways to do it. Is it through a survey that you've got to make sure you let people know how confidential and it doesn't pinpoint to what they are is? Is it through focus groups? Whatever it is, but there's so many different ways to figure that out. But yeah, as I was saying, we started with data because about 3 years ago, it was actually at a news union conference. There was a question to our CEO: what are we doing to get more diversity into the business? And actually, to be honest, the answer was not really much. Okay, so now what? So now we need to do something. We created a diversity board. It's made up of representatives from across the departments, from the different brands, to essentially have that voice there. And what were they doing? So actually they need to be facilitated by an external organization. And we needed to understand what the demographic makeup was, because if we only had gender by law, we had nationality by law, but that doesn't give you information to sexual orientation, to disability, I could list them all off. So we asked people, and we started at 58%, and we've now got to 80% or over 80% actually of completion rate, because people are seeing what we're doing with that data as well. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, with that data, with these sessions, we came up with a strategy, and that's kind of where it started. And even though the strategy, which is based on 3 pillars, and I won't go into all that detail now, but, even though it's based on 3 pillars and it has certain targets on it, it's evolving. And I think that's the best thing, is because it has to evolve, because so much is changing. And as we're moving closer and understanding more, we have to change, and we have to do more, and we have to adapt. Because like you said at the beginning, and all of you said at the beginning, it's always changing. Inclusion's kind of never really finished, is it? You have to find out what the next thing is. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. If there are anyone watching live, there are lots of people watching live. So if there is anyone watching live who has a burning question for our panel, more challenging the better, I say, then stick it here in the comments section, and we can facilitate that, providing we've got time. We have just had a question come in. I'll just pop that up on the screen now. Stefan says, a great panel. How do you support diversity and inclusion when people have varying and conflicting viewpoints?
To me, that question comes back to, as an organization, what have we signed up for? What drives our culture as an organization? Because we can have all these opinions when we're out there in the world, But here in the organization, we have three values or 5 values. So it would have to come back to what kind of an organization do we want to be? Once that is clear, how we want to treat one another in this context, then you can go, those viewpoints, people have a choice then. Because if you say, these are the 5 values that you want to see, this is how we live them out. For instance, if one of our values is diversity, when we get into a meeting, we're going to allow everybody's voice to be heard, even those that are quiet, because that's our value. So our teams are going to reflect that. So if as a manager, we're going to promote you because that's what you do, that you have demonstrated that you are not just comfortable with the boys club, the girls club, whatever club it is. You want to see a broader church in your teams. And that's how you bring all these viewpoints around values. What do we value in this organization? And if people are not, we have the red card. We say, my friend, here's a red card. You are not going to be playing in this team. You're going to take your time out. That's what we do.
Thanks, Jerry.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that. Like, I think, diversity is different. Different means you're going to have varying viewpoints. And if we didn't really have varying viewpoints, kind of would be a bit boring. But I think it goes back, to what Jerry was saying as well. It's about respecting them as well, making sure that respect is in place. And that's probably a massive value when it comes, or at least for me anyway, when it comes to that diversity sphere.
And my guess is when Stefan's asking, I don't know if what Stefan's asking about is whether leaders are on board. If people, I've heard conversations with HR and internal communication professionals around the world who say, my leader thinks this is a trend. It's a moment, not a movement. So we will just hop on the trend and then it'll go away. And there have been conversations around that, or they don't agree that things are going to progress. I always bring it, first of all, I think it's the organizations that are ready for change are going to be leaders in the space. And I truly believe you're going to have leaders. You're going to have followers who are going to follow the leaders. And then you're going to have those who feel that they're forced to make a change. And I'm a big believer that those who are forced to make the change may not be here later on, because the conversations I have with leaders is, what's the risk if we do nothing? What is the impact to our reputation? And especially when you're a global organization, you have a very different way of approaching it versus whether you're a local organization. How does this impact our recruitment? Because we're going to step into a war on talent very quickly. How is it going to impact our retention, keeping the best people working for us? And then what is it, are the impacts going to be on our results, right? And track those things. Those are all numbers based, right? So if you're actually, like Alia said earlier, if you're actually tracking the numbers, then you'll have data that tells you where you should be and where you should be going. And it becomes a conversation about business and business enablement. And that's the language of the leaders in a lot of cases. If you can have those conversations and understand the data that leads you there, then you can have the conversation that says, this is what I'm afraid of. This is what I fear will happen if we do nothing.
And there is the data out there showing that if you have a truly inclusive workforce, then you're creating these inclusive cultures. People feel psychologically safe. They can bring their own selves to work. You there have higher innovation levels. You there have higher business results. It shows in the results. It becomes a thrive or die almost situation for organizations of the future. And I think that's become really, that's been really demonstrated in the pandemic as well. We've got a couple of questions coming in. I'm going to just, one from Shidi. I hope I got the pronunciation of your name right there. How do you approach leadership that denies or rejects negative feedback? A little bit like what you were saying, Priya, I've definitely heard leaders say, well, this is just all fluffy nonsense, or that's not important. That's a fad. That'll go away next year.
I mean, we use a lot of data here. We run surveys all the time, try to take that data and break it up in a couple of different ways. What are the things that you think that you can solve at a manager or an employee level? What are the things that need to go to your CEO? What are the things you need that should go to your executive committee? So breaking up all of that information to see if you get resolution. The challenge you have when you have leadership that's in denial is that you have to be able to present what is a business picture, because let's be realistic, everything is about the ROI. So what's changed for people who are in human resources is that they've got to go to the table with data and analytics. They've got to be able to actually explain it to those leaders. They've got to explain what the risks are. And the obvious risk is that you will lose the most highly talented people that you have, and you will also gain a reputation which will block you from acquiring new talent. Because regardless of whether we think so or not, social media spreads the word about the type of company that you are, about the values that you have, whether you're a good corporate citizen or not. And so you've got to be able to make a business argument. And I think that's where human resources has had to evolve, as well as the diversity teams that are being newly stood up. And we're hoping that these investments are being made, and that they're investments that people are very serious about. And I'll tell you, some of the polling shows that a lot of people don't think this is sustainable. You're absolutely right. They believe that it's a trend. They believe organizations are doing what they think looks good, sounds good, appears to be good, is the right thing at the right time, but not making a real formal commitment to why are we doing this, and are we doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. So still have to prove there's an ROI, definitely, but getting people to really understand that in order for us to sustain the society that we want across this global, expansive world, we have got to be willing to let everybody be a part of that business so that there is that ownership and that buy-in. Otherwise, we're lost.
I know for a leader like me, we're getting ready for our diversity in PR conference that's happening virtually in October. And what's been exciting for me is trying to gather and find people and organizations, agencies in PR around the world who are doing some really great work. And when I start talking to them, an Indigenous agency here in Canada, an agency coming out from Nigeria that's growing globally, a UK agency that has in 1 year has 18 people working for them. And the diversity stories, like you're starting to see that emerging. So what we're doing is trying to showcase what good looks like, because we don't get enough of that. We see too much of the same thing over and over again, whereas this is stuff that's coming up that people don't see. And if, again, I'm going to say, if a few years from now you're wondering why you didn't do anything and you lost because of it, at that point I stop being sorry for you, right? Like, you have actually written your future. This is happening. I'm really excited about what's going, and what we're doing our best with a leader like me is preparing our people, women of color is where we focus right now, but also the conversation around diversity to showcase what great looks like.
Yeah. And indeed, it is a movement, and I don't think it is actually stoppable, because it's a movement for good, isn't it? That's what it is about. There is a warm feeling that you get as a human being when you have done right. I mean, that's what we want. But I think in our part of the world, having come from apartheid, one of the things that the new legislators, post-independence, people said, we're going to legislate. And part of the legislation, of course, you don't want to drive things by whipping people on the head. You want people to own this, to have this in their hearts. As I said earlier, conversations in the bedroom, conversations in the home. What are those conversations like? But it helps to have legislation where people can report. Every 1st of October here, every company that employs more than 50 people has to report to the Department of Employment and Labor. What are your statistics look like? And that commission has the clout to go into an organization and say, you madam, you sir, you are breaking the law. And the union, when you are unionized, the unions have the free right to say, listen, you're not playing the game that we expect you to play. But of course, you can say that's heavy-handed. And in fact, organizations sometimes don't like that. But it helps the HR people, the leadership that is keen to change. It also has a ripple effect, because if it's a global movement, your procurement, your supply value chain, people start asking, are you compliant? And if you are not, we're not going to include you. And you start the ROI, it's it's going to be affected because you'll be pariah. So I think as long as this global movement is there for everybody, and we practice that, we have new leaders that embrace inclusivity, diversity, inclusion, and equity, and justice, I think we're going to change the world. We'll see the world change.
We've had another question come in, Jerry. I love how you so eloquently and almost simplify it for us in such a beautiful way, but give us that energy that this is going to change the world. And I truly do believe that, and truly believe we all have a really crucial part to play in this. Another question that's just come in, and this is probably a lot of our listeners are thinking this. We either seem like we're not ready for change, we feel like we're not ready for change, our leaders might not be ready for change, or we don't know where to start. How would you prepare an organization for change? Another great question.
With the change management work that we do, first of all, I think the reaction you have to change is normal. And that's the one thing I say to everyone is that, the change curve, Kubler-Ross, those of you in change management, you start with shock, you go to anger, you move to resentment, and resistance. Then before you get to that adoption and acceptance and commitment. Right. And then you start all over again when something changes again. Right. So first of all, I try to say to people, know that the feelings, because to deny people having feelings about change, I think is wrong as well, whoever you are. So know that the feeling of discomfort and resistance and anger is exactly what you should be going through when things are shifting. And once we know what that is, then it's actually communicating through that change. So in internal communications, we're actually saying, what are the messages? What are the things people need to understand? What are the conversations that we need to have in order for us to move forward through that cycle? Some will move faster than others. Some will move slower. Some will never change, right? But it's about how do we get people shifting? And so I think first, knowing where you are, knowing where you want to go, because if you don't have goals, you're not going to move. Let's be honest. And once you have that, then you can actually help drive from a business perspective and a communications perspective, people through those conversations.
I'm a huge fan of that, the change curve, just letting people be in resistance, let them be in denial, understand that people go through change in different times and in different ways. It reminds me of the Tuckman's model as well, around forming, storming, norming, performing. Yeah. Be aware that when you're going through any change and bringing people together, there will be a storming stage in anything, and that's okay. And that is okay.
And in that resistance phase, it's important to say, what are you afraid of? It's important to have that conversation. What are we afraid of individually, for our families? I mean, there's usually that fear is grounded in something that's real that we all can relate to, and just having that open when people hear it out loud versus keeping it in actually will help us understand that we have more in common than we have that's different.
I think also because it's okay that you're going to go back on the change curve, because it's so straightforward and you're just going to end up on the other side. And I don't know about all of you, but I've just got it in my head right now. But you will go
Sorry.
No, because you went the same lines that I did, or same curve that I was going to anyway. But you are going to go back, and that's okay. Yes. And I think, to prepare, I mean, can you ever prepare anyone enough for change? Really, it just depends on the individual. But I think the first thing is communicate, communicate as much as you can. And then the second thing is, we have an awesome internal learning and development team, and they run courses like change management and change management for managers and change management. When you say management so many times, it kind of doesn't roll off the tongue anymore. But do you know what I mean? There's so many courses that we have designed in-house, which are specifically tailored to that as well, because they're for our people. So I think it's that education and the communication that needs to go hand in hand with it.
Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing is we have a change management committee here, but we spend a lot of time looking for the right change management model for our organization. And if you're somebody who needs small bites, or you can slip back, or people understand that you make progress, but you may have to change, or, you may have to course reverse, helping people understand what that process may be and finding people who have diverse perspectives across your entire organization to bring as part of your change management committee is extremely important. And make sure everybody at the table is not a leader, because you do want perspectives up and down that organization so that you are representing what the needs may be for people you might not have thought about.
Ruth, I liked this question. What do you do when you think the organization is really not ready? People are just looking at this. So I would say, just briefly, sometimes it helps to speak to the, I mean, we're talking in the context of an organization. As an HR professional or a change management specialist, whatever, is to, you observe, you hear what people are saying, you can smell the organization now, people are feeling this thing, the culture smells this way. Take time to have, it's your responsibility. If you also feel a sense of, no, we're not doing things right, make your voice heard. Sometimes don't say it, maybe start off by not saying it in public. Go to the people that can help change this thing. In organizations, is normally the people from, the people that have the responsibility to steer things in a certain way. Take time to approach them and say, these are my concerns, these are my observations. I think we should be doing 1, 2, 3. Hear them out. Because sometimes as leaders, we don't do the thing, we think we're doing right. No one is telling us, listen, your way is down. You're just naked here. No one is giving us feedback, and then we think we're good. So give them people. Just take the time to talk to them privately if you need to.
Thank you, Jerry. To bring this panel, which I could talk to you about all evening, but we will be moving into the Global Awards ceremony this evening, so I would love to talk to you more. But to bring this panel to almost a natural close, I'd like for each of you to share with me what would be your best advice for anyone who is watching this right now, whether they're watching it live or whether they're watching it on demand. They clearly have an interest in creating an inclusive culture. What would you advise them to go away and do differently?
Everyone's thinking. I keep saying what we need to do is focus on progress, not perfect. Where things are changing for all of us every day. The conversations are very top of mind, and it's how do we make moves forward collectively. Because I think we also have, I think Vida and I call it a little bit of the oppression of Olympics. Everybody's fighting for the higher voice, and I truly believe that's a strategy for those who want to keep the systems in place to put us up against each other. So I have been really appreciating different groups coming together and lifting and amplifying voices and providing support. So really thinking about how do we do this together? How do we move forward together? How do we support one another and focus on progress versus trying to create some sort of perfect program and waiting?
Absolutely. Just start. Just do something and start. Don't worry about getting to the end goal or being as inclusive as the organization next door. Just do something.
I think also, like, to follow on from that, someone amazingly said it to me, is mutual allyship, because if we can create a world where a Black transgender woman who's disabled is safe and comfortable, then everyone else will be. So actually, if we can do that in mutual allyship, that's fantastic. But I think you're right. Mine would probably be around, like, share your story and listen to other people's stories. We've gotten so used to, I think, putting people into boxes, and it's great because we're moving away from that, because not everyone falls under one box. But think about the intersectionality, right? You're not just a woman. You're not just an Asian woman. You're not just an LGBTQ plus Asian woman. There's so many more other nuances that fall into that. So actually, what does that mean? How do you bring those people together in intersectionality to understand that better? It's probably mine.
Thank you.
I would say take a little bit of risk. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit, because you've got to take the risk and be prepared to put an infrastructure in place. And, when people think about diversity, I'm going to talk about the one group that I feel like is always left out. neurodiversity is one of the biggest things, and people don't talk about it. You are talking about people who can be exceptionally talented, but many of whom are living on the fringe of society because as organizations, we're not willing to take the risk and to invest in providing the appropriate support that people might need to flourish in our organizations. And I'm just going to say that, if people look at the statistics, probably 85 to 90, maybe a tad bit higher, of all autistic adults are unemployed. And that's higher than any other percentage of other disabilities around the world. And so, you're talking about talented people who want to live purposeful lives just like the rest of us. But as organizations, we've got to remember that diversity is beyond the color of my skin, my sexual orientation. That diversity umbrella just continues to grow. And we've got to figure out a way to make sure that we capture the opportunity. We take it and we hold it and say, this door is open for everybody. And we start looking at real skill, talent, and ability and uniqueness. What do you bring that nobody else in my organization brings? And if we start to do that, I think things will change. But this one, similar to what Jerry says, is very much about society, because we look at neurodiverse people as third-class citizens. And so, that has to be a societal change as well as a corporate organization change.
I want to build on what Misty is saying. I mean, for 13 years, I was chairman of the Employers for Disability in South Africa. And so what I can say, what you do is you learn from others. There are organizations that are really, trailblazers in the area of inclusivity, diversity, equity, and justice. And just find those gems, those good organizations, and learn from them. And that's what that particular organization does, is to say, how can we benchmark ourselves? How can we learn from how other organizations are doing this better than us? We are part of an ecosystem. We're not in competition when it comes to inclusivity, diversity, and equity. We're not. We just bring a humanness in our organizations. And we need to be learning from others, those that are doing. So that would be my one advice to people. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know. I need to learn how to do this. And learn, I mean, I have colleagues now. You guys are going to be in part of my network now. I can learn from you. I can pick up your brains when I have the questions. And I think we should do that. It's not, when you're not stupid when you say, I don't know how to do this. Whether you're a leader or a follower, there are things that we just don't know, because maybe we're late starters and there are people that have done this. But I mean, to hear what Alia was saying about what her organization is doing, from all of us we can learn. So just reach out but get started. All right, let's just get started.
Get started, focus on progress, not perfection, develop mutual allyship, seek out those differences, particularly around the neurodiversity, and use one another and learn from one another. I hope I summarized everything I just heard then, but that was such a engaging and inspiring panel. I'm so grateful for you all for giving up 55 minutes and 18 seconds of your time so far today for sharing, and what a diverse, global, incredible bunch of panelists you are. We're so grateful for that. For anyone that is watching us on demand as well, keep the questions coming, keep the conversation going, and get in touch if you also want to hear more about how you can create an inclusive culture. But get started. I think it's a really key message from today. Misty, Alia, Priya, and Jerry, huge thank you for today. That was the best hour of my week, maybe my month actually. So a huge thank you for today. I really enjoyed that. Time is up. I wish we could carry on, but time is up. But like I said, a huge thank you for today. And that's the end of our debate, the end of the summer series, the end of summer almost. So yeah, again, a huge thank you to everyone. A huge thank you to everyone that's watching on demand. Keep the questions coming, and we'll see you again next summer. Watch out for what's coming next from us. So it's a bye for now. Thank you.